Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Bihari Gopi Jannavalabha Giravarendari Jannavalabha Giravarendari Gopi Jannavalabha Giravarendari Valabha Giravarendari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Shodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari 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 Gopi Jannavalabha Giravarendari Alabha Giravarendari Gopi Jannavalabha Giravarendari Gopi Jannavalabha Giravarendari Jashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Shodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Brajajana Ranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Tira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari 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 Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 14, starting at text 39. I'm going to read a few verses. I'll just chant the Sanskrit for the first verse. Samvatsarantehi bhavan Ekaratram Mayeshvara Ramsyat Yapatyani Chate Bhavishyant Yaparanibo Samvatsarantehi bhavan Ekarat Ramayeshvara Ramsyatya patyani chate bhavishyantya paranibo. Next, please. Bhavan Ekaratram Maheshvara Ramsyatya Panyani Chate Bhavishyantya Paranibo Samvatsarantihi Bhavan Ekaratram Maheshwaram Ramsyatya Patyani Chate Bhavishyantya Paranibo. Matajis. Samvatsarantihi Bhavan Ekaratram Maheshwara Ramsyatya Patyani Chate Bhavishyantya Paranibo Samvatsarantihi Bhavan Ekaratram Maheshwara Ramsyatya Patyani Chate Bhavishyantya Paranibo Samvatsara Ante. At the end of every year, he, indeed, Bhavan, your good self, Ekaratram, one night only, Maya, with me, Ishvara, my husband, Ramsyati, will enjoy sex life, Apatyani, children, Cha, also, Te, your, Bhavishyanti, will generate, Aparani, others one after another. Bo, O my dear king. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada. O my dear king, you will be able to enjoy with me as my husband at the end of every year for only one night. In this way, you will have children one after another. Purport. Although Urvasi had adversely explained the nature of a woman, Maharaj Purava was very much attached to her, and therefore she wanted to give the king some concession by agreeing to be his wife for one night at the end of each year. Text 40. Understanding that Urvasi was pregnant, Pururava returned to his palace. At the end of the year, there at Kurukshetra, he again obtained the association of Urvasi, who was then the mother of a heroic son. Text 41. Having regained Urvasi at the end of the year, King Pururava was most jubilant, and he enjoyed her company and sex for one night. But then he was very sorry at the thought of separation from her. So Urvasi spoke to him as follows. Text 42. My dear king, seek shelter of the Gandharvas, for they will be able to deliver me to you again. In accordance with these words, the king satisfied the Gandharvas by prayers, and the Gandharvas, being pleased with him, gave him an Agnistali girl who looked exactly like Urvasi. Thinking that the girl was Urvasi, the king began walking with her in the forest, but later he could understand that she was not Urvasi, but an Agnistali. Purport. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur remarks that Pururava was very lusty. Indeed, immediately after getting the Agnistali girl, he wanted to have sex with her. But during sexual intercourse, he could understand the girl was an Agnistali, not Urvasi. This indicates that every man attached to a particular woman knows the particular characteristics of that woman during sex life. Thus, Pururava understood during sexual intercourse that the Agnistali girl was not Urvasi. Text 43. King Pururava then left Agnistali in the forest and returned home, where he meditated all night upon Urvasi. In the course of his meditation, the Trecha millennium began, and therefore the principles of the three Vedas, including the process of performing yajna to fulfill fruitive activities, appeared in his heart. Purport. It is said, Trechayam yajato mukai. In Trecha Yuga, if one performs yajnas, he would get the results of those yajnas. By performing Vishnu Yoga specifically, one could even achieve the lotus feet of a Supreme Personality of Godhead. Of course, yajna is intended to please the Personality of Godhead. While Pururava was meditating upon Urvasi, Trecha Yuga began, and therefore the yajnas were revealed in his heart. But Pururava was a materialistic man, especially interested in enjoying the senses. Yajnas for the enjoyment of the senses are called karma kandiya yajnas. Therefore, he decided to perform karma kandiya yajnas to fulfill his lusty desires. In other words, karma kandiya yajnas are meant for sensuous persons, whereas yajna should actually be performed to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. To please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in Kali Yuga, the Sankirtan yajna is recommended. Yagnai Sankirtanai Prayer Yajantihi Sumedasa. Only those who are very intelligent take to the Sankirtan yajna to fulfill all their desires, material and spiritual, whereas those who are lusty for sense enjoyment perform the karma kandiya yajnas. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swam Nityanamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvashesha Sunyavadi Pashtacha Shatarane Omagana Timaranda Shandanan Shalokaya Chakshuram Militam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, this pastime with King Pururava occurs over quite a long duration of time. So I'll just ask you, how long has King Pururava thought about Krishna or thought about Vishnu during this duration of this pastime? How many times has he even mentioned Krishna's name? 0. We might say that King Pururava, he literally, well, I don't know if you have the expression in Slovenia, but sometimes when they get a little crazy, we say they fell off the deep end. So King Pururava literally totally lost his higher intelligence. So much so it's described later in the pastime when he was performing these yajnas. So when you perform Vedic yajnas, there's a type of wood called arni wood, and you rub these sticks together and it produces fire. So it's actually described that King Pururava was so incredibly materialistically minded that when he was rubbing the arni wood together to start the fire, he was meditating that the one stick was him and the other stick was Urvasi. Definitely, he was off the deep end. So he was completely absorbed in the thought of sense gratification. And as Maharaj was saying, how in modern materialistic culture, it tends to create people who are very materially absorbed. And especially we see that through the media, how very much especially through advertising, the relationship of men and women and how it's presented is presented in a way that one can think, if I consume this product or purchase this item, it will improve my sexuality and help me attract the other person. And especially, Kali Yuga becomes more and more and more degraded as time passes, and now it's becoming extremely problematic with the proliferation of pornography, which is so easily available on the internet, on phones, and it's becoming extremely problematic in society. Pornography is just a complete objectification of women. And what happens when men view pornography, they do not see women as objects that they do not see women as human beings they should protect and give affection to. They see women as object of gratification. And the nature of pornography is such that you cannot be satisfied with some simple two-dimensional image. It becomes boring after some time. So pornography tends to become more and more graphic. And then even the graphic pornography does not satisfy those men. And so then they introduce violence towards women. So men somehow they get stimulated by seeing this pornography with violence towards women. So much so that some men become so damaged by this, that for some men it's almost impossible for them to have children because they cannot even get sexually aroused to beget a child without violence towards women. This is actually occurring in society. We think Kali Yuga was degraded, it's becoming incredibly degraded. So pornography is an incredible problem, and sometimes people say, well, why can't they just shut it down? And actually they do make attempts to shut pornography down. However, every single day, 250 at least more of these sites pop up. So it's something that's very, very dangerous. And if we're ever tempted to fall prey to the attraction of that form of media, we should remember King Pururava and how he ended up completely devoid of intelligence. So again, King Pururava, he had like no sense of Krishna consciousness, no sense of spirituality, just completely absorbed in the thought of Urvasi and having sex. That was his whole existence. So in contrast to King Pururava, we have the example of Kardama Muni. It's also a very interesting pastime because that pastime is about the intimate affairs of Kardama Muni and Devahuti, which are actually described in quite detail. And so in this pastime of King Pururava, we see he just meets Urvasi, and 2 minutes later, he's telling her he wants to have sex with her. And reminded me that it was a famous song in the 1970s, "Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name?" So what's wrong with that picture? You don't even know someone, and you're telling them you loved him. So that was what King Pururava was like. So you contrast that with Kardama Muni, we understand that he was in the forest, and he performed austerities for 10,000 years. He performed great austerities for 10,000 years. And he performed those austerities in devotional service to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he satisfied the Supreme Lord to such an extent that one day he looked up from his meditation and he saw Garuda with Lord Vishnu riding on his back descend. And Lord Vishnu, Garuda landed, and Lord Vishnu began to explain how he was very pleased by the austerities of Kardama Muni, by his devotional service in these austerities. And that's very interesting. Kardama Muni he began to glorify the Lord. And then he actually spoke in one verse condemning persons who approach the Supreme Lord for materialistic desires. He did that. And then immediately after saying that, he said, however, my dear Lord, he said, I think I need a wife of like disposition. He wanted a wife of like disposition. And he also admitted he had these desires. So Kardama Muni, he understood what he needed for his spiritual evolution, that he needed a situation where he could purify his material desires and render service to the Lord, and in that way move towards complete spiritual perfection. We hear nothing of that in the pastimes of Pururava. It was just endless lust. But Kardama Muni, he was very serious about spiritual life. So his desire wasn't just to have sex. His desire, he wanted to progress in spiritual life with a partner of like disposition. And you can see Kardama Muni and Devahuti, they actually performed great austerities also in devotional service for some great duration of time. And the Lord actually, it was interesting, the Lord assured Kardama Muni that actually Swayambhuva Manu is coming here in a few days, and his daughter actually has a crush on you. Like she likes you. And he said, you will beget 9 very wonderful daughters, and he said, I will appear as your son. So that's something very extraordinary, that Kardama Muni was going to beget an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So his austerities, we can see that he was actually very introspective person. And that it must have taken a lot of courage and a sense of vulnerability to be able to say to the Lord, my dear Lord, I think I need to get married. Because we hear so much about how materialistic household life can be extremely degrading and entangling. But Kardama Muni, he did not have that kind of household life. He did not enter into the deep, dark well. We read how Kardama Muni, he entered into an aerial, a glowing aerial mansion, where he engaged in his household activities with Devahuti. And so his grihastha life was very, very glorious and very wonderful. And it's glorified in the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a very wonderful example. So it's very important to see that there is a difference between the Griha Andakupam, which King Pururava was one of the acharyas, and the difference between Krishna-conscious spiritual grihastha life that's exemplified by a great saint like Kardama Muni. So it's important to remember that distinction, and not to blur those distinctions. Because it's very important in the Srimad Bhagavatam that it's stated that if one considers a Vaishnava to come from a certain caste or a certain creed, if we place a designation upon a Vaishnava, that's actually an offense, and it describes that if we do that, we reduce ourselves to the level of a cow or an ass. It's not a healthy state of consciousness. A Vaishnava may be situated in a certain situation, but he is not that designation. Prabhupada gave one example once. He said, you may see a devotee sweeping the temple. And Srila Prabhupada said, he is not a sweeper. He's not a sweeper. Srila Prabhupada said, he is teaching others how to sweep in devotion. So that's very different. So one is not a Sudra, one is not a Vaishya, one is not a Grihastha, one is not a Brahmachari, one is not a sannyas. We're all eternal servants of Krishna, and in the service of Krishna, we have taken certain roles to set examples for society, how to live peacefully, happily, and progressively in Krishna consciousness. There's another example of, in Chaitanya Leela, there was one Brahmin named Pradyumna Mishra who approached Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and requested him to tell him the essence of Krishna consciousness, the highest pinnacle of understandings. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, I know nothing about this, but there's one very, very elevated soul, Ramananda Roy. You should go see him. So that may have been a little puzzling to Pradyumna Mishra, who was a Brahmin and may have had a little bit of pride in his Brahminical status. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was telling him to go and take shiksha from a Sudra. Ramananda Roy was, by material designation, he was a Sudra. But Pradyumna Mishra went, and he realized that how Ramananda Roy was extremely exalted soul. So it's very important not to see other Vaishnavas by designation, but to appreciate that everyone is engaged in Krishna consciousness according to their capacity and working to set examples for others. And that's an important duty for all of us, whatever ashram we're in, to set examples. And also we see how Kardama Muni, he had such wonderful children. He had 9 saintly daughters and Kapila Muni. So similarly in Krishna consciousness, it's like we see this little child comes in the temple every morning, he just zooms right up to Govardhan Hill and he's taking the dust of Govardhan and putting it on his head. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? You have no idea who these kids are. And I mentioned last night how, well, actually I was just thinking it again because yesterday Maharaj was asking me about one of our god sisters named Pasupati Dasi, who came to Vancouver, and she was an extremely renounced lady. She had a small child. She stayed in a cardboard box under a stairway. I think it was a refrigerator box or something. So she and her daughter would sleep in a box at night under the stairs. It's like very austere, very nice devotee. And so, as I mentioned last night about how this lady from the Soviet Union, she didn't want to buy a book at first because she was told that we were a dangerous cult. And this is in the 70s, so at the height of the communist regime. She worked at the Russian consulate, and so she didn't want to hear anything about Krishna. She was just looking at the devotees. And she noticed the little children dancing, very happy, and she called me over and she said, I want to buy your book. She said, I can see that these children are taking to this so spontaneously. She said, there must be something real here. And she told me, I want to buy your book. I'm going to take it back to Russia and tell all my friends about this. So where did that come from? That came from these little children. And do you think Krishna didn't notice that? These kids helped smuggle a book into the Soviet Union, which was probably read by hundreds of people. They would photograph the books and make albums of pictures, all the pages of Prabhupada's books. So one of those books was smuggled in via some little kids who were just happy in Krishna consciousness. I have no idea who they are. And I was thinking also that sometimes, sometimes we wonder, it seems like some of the children, they leave Krishna consciousness or go outside of Krishna consciousness. And from my observations and talking with people, sometimes that's because some of the children have seen hypocrisy in our movement, and it's very hard for children to witness hypocrisy. And that makes it difficult for them to want to integrate Krishna consciousness in their life. So that's most actually a failure of our entire society to properly set examples for children and realize the importance of children growing up in healthy, stable families. And we knew one boy brought up in a devotee family. When he was 14 years old, he actually left home and got a girlfriend and became a punk rocker with pink spiked hair. And so everyone was thinking, well, he's pretty much gone. Then surprisingly, a few years later, he decided to move in the brahmachari ashram, so everyone was surprised. Wow, he's back in the Krishna consciousness. So he was in the brahmachari ashram for some time, and one of my friends was watching this boy, who was now probably maybe early 20s, sell someone a book. And the person who was buying the book asked this young man, "How did you become a devotee?" So my friend thought he would say, "Well, my parents were devotees and I grew up in that atmosphere." That's not the answer he gave. The young man said, "I was on the street one day and a devotee gave me a book and I read it." So there was a certain point that he made the conscious choice that I'm going to become a devotee. Now he's a real exemplary member of our community. He's got 2 beautiful, wonderful kids. And so we don't know who these kids are and how Krishna consciousness will manifest in their life. So Krishna consciousness, it's something we have to understand very carefully. And especially at this point, how Kardama Muni, he seriously deliberated on, for 10,000 years, what direction his life would take. He made a very serious decision. And he made a very wonderful decision. Wonderful decision. And so we understand in Bhagavad Gita how Krishna, he says, "Tam eva saranam gacha sarva bhavane bharata." Krishna says, "Just surrender unto me utterly." So in one sense, we can say that's a demand. Krishna is saying, just surrender to me utterly. But in the next verse, Krishna says, "Vimri she shena ashe shena yatechasi yataguru." Krishna says, "I've explained this to you." And then Krishna says, "Now you deliberate on this fully and do as you wish to do." And in that purport, Srila Prabhupada describes that this is actually the best way to accept instructions, the best way to surrender to Krishna, to deliberate on the matter as fully as possible with one's intelligence and then make a decision. And sometimes Srila Prabhupada used to condemn blind following. He wanted us to be very thoughtful. So right at the end of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna demands surrender. Then he says, you just think about this fully. And then he tells Arjuna, now I'm going to explain to you the most secret knowledge, the most precious knowledge. And it's simply, Krishna says, Man manabhava mad bhakto majijimam namastu. Just think of me and become my devotee. Just think of me and become my devotee. That's such an incredibly important verse. Actually, when Uddhava, he saw Krishna before Jai. He saw Krishna before Krishna was to depart from this world, and Krishna spoke to Uddhava Gita, and then it's described that Uddhava was walking away from Krishna, knowing that he'd never see Krishna again. You can imagine how heartbreaking that must have been for him. And he's walking away, and it's described that Uddhava, he heard Krishna within his heart say this, Man manabhava mad bhakto majijimam namaskaru. Just think of me and become my devotee. And it's described that very, very often Uddhava would sit with Arjuna and they would discuss different things. And many, many times Uddhava and Arjuna, they would discuss what Krishna said, always think of me and become my devotee. That's such a profound, powerful verse. And it's right near the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. Just think of me and become my devotee. So anyone can do that in any position, any condition of life. Prabhupada used to say it doesn't cost anything. There's no loss, only gain. To simply think of Krishna. So whatever situation we are in our lives, whatever ashram, we simply have to think of Krishna and become his devotee. And then Krishna says that, how if you surrender unto me utterly, I'll protect you. Do not fear. So in relationship to this verse also, it's very important that in our lives we have to determine what situation will be most beneficial for our spiritual advancement. And that's going to be very difficult for everyone. But the point is to put oneself in a position where one can be peaceful and think of Krishna. There was a period of time in our movement where several sannyasis had left their ashram, they'd given up sannyas, and Prabhupada commented upon this in the pastimes of Gajendra, the elephant, who was engaged in this great battle with a crocodile, and the crocodile had pulled Gajendra into the water, and Gajendra, is described, was getting weaker because the water was not his natural element. The crocodile was getting energized because the water was his natural element. And so it was very, very precarious for Gajendra. But it's described that Gajendra, in that perilous situation in the water, he remembered Krishna. He remembered some prayers he said in a previous life. And there's this famous picture of Garuda with the lotus flower. He's offering this prayer to Krishna, and the Lord appears and saves him. And Prabhupada gives this example in relationship to, these sannyasis changing their ashram. Prabhupada said, he said, it's better to be in a position, he said the thing is to somehow fight Maya. Somehow or other from some position. And if one cannot remain sannyas, not that you completely give up the fight against Maya, but Prabhupada said, better these sannyasis enter the grahastha ashram and live peacefully and prosecute spiritual life. And Prabhupada, he actually, we even had one god brother who was sannyas, he left sannyas, left the movement, and he actually came back to Srila Prabhupada with his wife. And Prabhupada actually greeted him really, really warmly. Prabhupada was so happy to see him. So Prabhupada was not concerned about what our designation was, what position. He wanted us to try to learn how to imbibe that understanding of how to think of Krishna and become his devotee. So Bhagavatam is there's such a broad spectrum of understanding the philosophy and meaning of application of Krishna consciousness. And sometimes when we see the whole spectrum, we can get a more clear understanding of the application of Krishna consciousness. Like King Purava, that's one end of the spectrum, and Kardama Muni's pastime, that's the complete other spiritual, elevated end of the spectrum. But we should carefully understand both and understand how to read those pastimes and use them to see how we can progress in spiritual life. And we should be very careful that we do not use those pastimes to pass judgment upon others. Because again, that reduces us to a very material state of consciousness. So we have to leave this morning. We're going to leave a little early. So I'm just going to end class now. If there's any brief questions or comments, I'll take them. And if not, we'll end here.
Thank you so much for such a nice class. It's very nice how you connected this, I see, as a consumeristic mentality in media, and then also we can develop that kind of mentality also with everything we do. We also can consume shastras to defend our attitudes or something not to really spiritual progress. And sometimes that come, as it's also described in these verses, as a weakness, as a anarthas. And sometimes we are eager to surrender Krishna, something that we are good at, but we are not so eager to surrender our anarthas, but we are trying to hide. So I'm just wondering, why is that so, and how we can overcome, how we can come up and say, Krishna, this is my weakness, please help me, and so how we can switch that kind of mentality.
I've been trying to figure that out for 49 years. It's described how these anartas, they're like weeds that grow around the devotional creeper, and sometimes they're almost indistinguishable from the creeper. And if you're a gardener, you know sometimes weeds are growing and it's hard to tell which is your plant and which is the weed. So that's why it's so important to have association of devotees, so important to read Srila Prabhupada's books regularly and be thoughtful. We're not just trying to get an intellectual understanding, but we're really trying to understand the devotional essence so that we can learn to see how to apply that knowledge, not just on an intellectual platform, but in our lives in a devotional way. And I think the more we can become attentive to that, the more we can begin to see that, well, these things that might seem like a part of my creeper, but, you know, from understanding Prabhupada's books and Prabhupada's mood, that maybe that's something I should root out. Answer the question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Prabhu behind had a question.
Thank you. My question is about decision also.
Decision?
Yeah. So when I first came to the Krishna consciousness, devotees talk and Srila Prabhupada talk in books about how to should surrender and come back to Godhead in this lifetime.
Come back to Godhead.
Yeah, to Krishna in this lifetime. No other birth. So nowadays, I even could hear from other devotee that they are not ready to finish everything in this lifetime and that they take decision to pass few more. So how, and I try to not judge that. So question is how it could be auspicious or inauspicious for our spiritual life to make decision this lifetime or not this lifetime?
We should develop that desire. And I think that comes the more we read Srila Prabhupada's books, learn to apply the philosophy, and get a taste for serving Srila Prabhupada and his mission. And it's interesting that Srila Prabhupada wrote in one purport that following the order of the spiritual master is tantamount, is non-different than seeing Krishna face to face. And he would say that you should not be concerned with going back to Godhead, but be concerned with following the order of the spiritual master, with serving Srila Prabhupada's mission. So the more we can do that, going back to Godhead is included in that. So we don't so much have to think of myself and my liberation, but by being absorbed in trying to become Krishna conscious to the best of our ability to assist Srila Prabhupada, Krishna will take care. Just like in the Bhagavad Gita, it's described as some yogis, they live under a certain situation, or they leave their bodies in a certain situation of the sun and the moon, and they can go back to the spiritual world, and if they don't, they go somewhere else. But Prabhupada describes a devotee, he doesn't have to worry about that. His only concern is serving Krishna, and when Krishna desires, he will go back to Godhead. So we should have that desire, and especially we should at least be attentive to things that may be detrimental to us having that desire to enter into devotional service and serve with this kind of mood of being absorbed in Srila Prabhupada's mission and becoming Krishna conscious. And in that way, our ultimate liberation is assured by Krishna. And for a devotee, like King Chitraketu, he said, actually when he was cursed by Parvati, Lord Shiva said to Chitraketu that these Narayana Parayanas, these topmost devotees such as Chitraketu, to them, whether they go to heaven or they go to hell, as long as they can serve Krishna, that's good enough for them. So we want to go back to Godhead, but at the same time, we do that by learning to be completely absorbed in selfless, loving service. Then Krishna says, my protection is assured. Thank you. So maybe I'll end. Okay, one last question.
Thank you. Yesterday, one nice devotee said that he don't feel neither to be brahmachari, neither to be grihasta. So, what is your opinion about that?
Well, he needs to be thoughtful. Maybe he needs to be thoughtful. Maybe he needs to be introspective to find where he needs. And in relationship with the pastime of Damodar Leela, Mother Yasoda, she was serving Krishna, feeding him, and she left to look after the milk. And Prabhupada commented on that in one purport in Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he said sometimes devotees they're perplexed which service to do, which service is more important. And then Prabhupada quoted the verse, Tesham satatam yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yenam mam upayante te. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give them the intelligence by which they can come to me. So Srila Prabhupada said that in those kind of perplexing situations, if we be introspective and concentrate on our devotion and our service, and Krishna, he can reveal in time. Okay, so thank you very much. Hare Krishna, I'm going to miss all of you. I hope we come back again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Come back again.
Yes,
Thank
okay.
you so much for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing your wonderful experience, for being exemplar to us. We wish you safe travel
Thank you.
to France, to Mayapura, and to come back soon again.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Hari Bol. Jai. ISKCON Ljubljana devotees ki jai.
napišem na pamet.